So I was 7, and we were on our way to the art museum. On our way across the main walk on the grand lawn, I noticed a lion 15 feet high and green as grass. Now, of course, I said, "Mommy, what's the lion?" And she said, "Don't worry, dear, it's merely a shrub." And the next question, of course, was, how did a shrub turn into a lion? And so Mom took my hand, and closer and closer and closer we went until I could actually reach out and touch the green hair of this lion, and then reach through the outer skin and find the wire armature or topiary template inside. And I discovered just how shrubs turn into lions. They follow the template, and everything excess is snipped off. So in an interesting way, you plant a shrub inside an armature or a template, and it grows and grows, and you remove everything that doesn't fit within the template, and soon you have a full-grown lion. Well, now what's interesting about topiary is that it uses a physical template. But our idea today is that corporate culture and corporations may use some aspects of a physical template, the place, the building, the architecture, the design, the style, but there are also aspects of that template that are more than physical. They approach the actual spiritual aspect, the soul of the corporation, and those aspects can be the subject of templates too. Now let's break today's discussion down into 3 parts. Let's start by talking about culture by default, which seems to be the way most corporate life is undertaken these days. Then let's move on and talk about culture by design, or directed by template. And finally, let's talk about the cornerstones, the component parts of your template that might be amenable to being affected by your intentions. So let's begin by talking about culture by default. Now, I'd say this is culture in the absence of a template or in the absence of a form. There are no explicit shared agreements about how this organization is going to carry on. And so management devolves down into management by guerrilla. The strongest person, the strongest player, does it their way. And the question is, what does John want? What does Jennifer want? We'll do it John's way, or we'll do it Jennifer's way. And so the default culture becomes the culture and the style of the strongest player. This tends to result in kind of a freehand approach to the lion. So maybe this lion has not quite such a beautifully formed haunch and maybe not such a beautifully formed mane because it was trimmed to meet John or Jennifer's style or desire, but maybe it wasn't as elegant as it could be. Maybe it wasn't as well thought out. Freehand always gets you whatever you get that day. And it changes based on the mood of the person doing the trimming. So culture by default is potluck. And in many cases, it really does devolve down to the standard default industry culture. So if John works at company A for a while and gets a good handle on default culture and culture according to John, and then moves over to company B and discovers that now it's the same culture, only it's culture designed by Fred, well, you see the issue. That we have kind of a lowest common denominator approach to culture in most of corporate America. And as a result, people haven't got a clue how things work, which has resulted in an interesting reality these days. A lot of the people who are studying corporate culture have come to the conclusion that there is such a thing. There is corporate culture. And their approach to this is we have to decide what the corporate culture is. We have to decode it. We have to discover it. We have to unearth it. And when we do, we'll have an academic bonanza and we'll have enough material for at least 1 or 2 doctoral theses. I think there's more to it than that, folks. I don't think it's an issue of discovering corporate culture or decoding it. I think it's a matter of designing it and building it and evolving it. That's the business we're in. So let's suggest that in an organization with culture by default, most of what's going on in the world today, you have managers who are exhausted, frustrated, and prone to outrage because they are consulted on every decision because there's nothing else to consult. There is no compass for the organization. As a result, they have to keep going back to the most powerful people in the organization for their ultimate decisions. And these people then get frustrated, they get touchy, they get tired, and they are worn out by having to constantly decide every major issue in the organization as if it were the first time. In the absence of a cultural template or a way of making decisions in the organization, you're stuck with going to the most powerful person. So the really sad outcome about culture by default is that you wear out the management team, a new group comes on, and they impose their culture on the organization again. So if you'd like to operate in a different way, perhaps we need to consider a different model, and that would be culture by design. Culture driven and managed to and within a corporate template, a cultural template. Now, a cultural template, much the way it informs a topiary bush, informs everything about the organization. It informs behavior, it informs decision making, it informs style, it informs and actually defines the character and, of course, the personality of the organization. So anything that can be decided in a corporation will be and should be decided by referring to the cultural template. Now, who makes the template? Well, management makes the template. But the point is, you make a decision once and then turn it into policy, which is the chief place we go to find out what the cultural template is all about. So when you're building culture by design to a template, all decisions lead back to building corporate culture through policy development. And one of the nice outcomes is happy managers, because they're not being called to make every decision. They make one decision and then refer all questions to the policy manual. Aha! All right then, well, what should be in the policy manual? What are the cornerstones we might use to build a culture in our organization? What kinds of things are the things that we begin to set up to characterize the way we do business in our corporation? Well, we at Fusion Group would suggest that there are probably 4 key issues and then some ancillary things that you might consider. The number one is, how do we communicate here in this company? And we'd suggest that you train all of the people in the organization that there is a standard approach to communication here. And one of the key things in that standard is that we don't have a meeting without knowing what's supposed to happen. We don't call a meeting without being clear about the decision that's going to be called at the end of that meeting. And we inform people of that before they're ever called to arrive. So decision making and communication are a little clearer, they're a little more open, they're a little more relaxed, and once everybody in the organization understands this is how work is done, this is how we communicate here, openness is good, questions are good, everybody can participate, then you get a pretty clear idea about how day-to-day life will be conducted inside the organizations. What about sales? Well, we think sales is another fundamental in the organization. It determines how your organization is going to be represented out to the public. Now, our consideration is that the servant salesperson or the counselor salesperson is a model that's going to gain much more credibility in the coming years, as we understand that the salesperson is here to serve the customer, to serve the investor, to serve the financial professional, to serve the person who's ultimately going to buy. So you're not there just to move product. You're not there just to make a profit. You're there in order to make sure that the customer makes a purchase and is happy with the purchase and is telling everyone else about their purchase and is getting ready to come back and purchase again. A little bit of a different approach from the historic approach to selling, which is a little bit more about making the pitch and getting on to making the next pitch. So we think the definition of salesperson or sales professional needs to expand some in the next 10 years. We are dedicated to being there to help you do that. Further, management is one of the fundamental cornerstones that we think you need to begin taking responsibility for. Servant management being one of the key delineators of management that we think is done at its best. Managers are not there in order to give orders to people so much as they're there to help people make intelligent decisions and to teach them how to make those decisions. Managers are there to remove barriers to people doing the jobs that they're entrusted with doing. Managers are there in order to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable knowing that management has their back. Now, this is an approach to leadership that has been taken by the United States military for the better part of the last 50 years. Radical change from earlier military models, but a dramatic demonstration of how the culture of the military has been evolving and moving into a leadership role and culture as a whole. Servant management. Management's not there to push people down and beat them up. Management is there to serve the legitimate needs of the people they serve. Strategic planning, or the way we do strategy, might be another interesting cornerstone. A lot of corporations are kind of dedicated to the idea that strategic planning is doing a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and initiatives, and then saying, okay, we need to increase profit by 10% next year. Whereupon the SWOT analysis is put into a drawer, and we go until the third quarter and discover we're not going to make our numbers, and we then start firing people left and right until we get pretty close to our cost objectives and profit objectives. Not necessarily a lofty, empowering way of thinking about strategy. We think maybe you take a different approach. You look out 5 years and say, if it's perfect in 5 years, what's it going to be like? And right away, the imaginations of all the people involved get fired up, and pretty soon people are getting out of bed in the morning because they want to take the company to that place 5 years out that we've been discussing. Now, of course, you need to work backwards from the 5-year goal down to what it's going to take for us to make next year in order to make it the perfect company we've been envisioning. But now there's a reason for the increase in profitability. There's a justification for working harder to make that money, because if we make that money, I'm going to get my piece. And that is going to make me more interested in getting up and working the 90 hours a week it's probably going to require to get the job done. So communication, sales, management, strategy, the basic cornerstones that taken together form the bedrock agreements on which a good corporation is founded. And explicit, shared agreements that work across the depth and breadth and height and depth of the organization so that everybody knows what game we're playing. We're playing an explicit, winnable game in which we all feel invested. Now, there are some ancillary issues. Maybe ethics would be one of the cornerstones that it's very worthwhile to install. We consider ethics at Fusion Group as our compass. What's best for all concerned? And our simple formula here is what's best for our clients, what's best for our company, what's best for our people and our families. And we do it in that order. We say that the families come third, except when they don't. So when the kids need help, everything stops and we take care of that. And then we put the clients back at the top of the list. But you know, that ethical compass is something that is not nearly as explicit as it probably needs to be in most corporations. So that might be a cornerstone that you'd like to install as well. I think that's a good way to start. Let's say that if we were to summarize all of this today, that culture by default is done because people haven't taken the time to install fundamental cornerstones about how the organization works. If you don't take the time to install the template, then you can't just trim off the excess. You have to do everything freehand, and you have to do everything freehand every week, week in, week out, 52 times a year. Culture by default wears out the management team. And of course, it wears out the people being managed. Culture by design, on the other hand, means you put a template in place and you run the organization according to policy. Policy is formed every time you make a decision. Culture by design can be evolved and can be managed. And if you're not having to make each and every decision in the organization, then you as a manager can step back and say, you know, I think we need to grow the line a little bit more in this direction. And that gives you the opportunity to trim a little here and move a little here and shape the underlying template just a little bit more to your liking. Wouldn't that be a great way to think about management? Being able to reshape the template more to your liking in a way that's more optimum for all concerned? And then finally, if we were to list the cornerstones we're thinking of to comprise a really solid, well-rounded organization, there are probably 4 primary with a couple of ancillary ones. And the beauty is that anything you think important can become a cornerstone, can form your cultural template. The big question then is, Mommy, how do corporations turn into multinational dynasties? And the answer is just the way shrubs turn into lions, by forming an informed cultural template.